We've been studying in the book of Ruth. If you missed last week's study, looking at some characters leading up to Christmas morning, we talked about recovery, trauma recovery. We looked at Naomi and the things that she was facing. The culture had created crisis in about everybody's life. Go back and read the book of Judges. Do not dehumanize people in the Bible. These are people who lived every day. These are people who had jobs and families, and they loved their kids like you love your kids. But we have a culture and a climate of God's people. It started living and taking God out of the equation of their everyday life. All of a sudden, God was not important in their life. All of a sudden, their careers, this and all getting there and getting to this place in life. And if we get there and get a good retirement and retire good, then maybe we'll try church out at that point in our life. But right now, all of those type things, nothing's new under the sun. And so Judges, if you'll see, I am not making any of this up. Look at the time of the Judges. It was constant, up, and down. There was no true leader nationally. And those judges were just leaders in different parts of Israel. And so if you add the dates up, it would be about 354 years of history, but we don't know if those judges overlapped. I do not think it was 354 years of time. That was when the judges ruled and the ones that ruled during those times, but those rulerships overlapped each other because they were not national leaders, they were community leaders, okay? And so you have one judge, like for instance, Ehud could have been ruling down in Bethlehem, Judea. Shamgar could have been ruled up. Two that was more national would have been Gideon and Samson. But the climate of the people was every man was doing that which is right in their own eyes. I mean, everyone just, God, take a back seat. This is how I feel about it. Here's how I feel about church. Here's what the church does for me. And here's sort of, here's how God is. It's not going to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and taking it for what it is, literal, and who God is. No, forget that. It's how am I feeling? Well, how do you feel about God and what He did there at the Red Sea? It seems sort of harsh. Yeah, that's sort of harsh, isn't it? Let's talk about God being harsh. And everybody's feelings came on the table, and everyone was doing that which is right. It didn't say that they wasn't religious. It said every man was doing that which is right in their own eyes. So truth had just fallen to the streets, which created crisis in people's lives. When you look at the condition, and so you had foreign dictators come in and ruling the people, which created crisis. You had civil war within the country. Judges 19, 20, and 21. You had cousin against cousin. It said, shall we fight our brothers? You had brothers against brothers. You had 11 tribes almost annihilate a whole tribe. Do you know what type of crisis that created? Some of you that's fought in the military and war and what you live with, we talked to some veterans and what they live with in the theater of war. These people are no different. Think about coming off the Civil War. Think about the various things. Think about the different abuses that takes place when everyone's doing that which is right in their own eyes. Think about the abuse when those men came to get the men there in that Judges 19. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's rated mature. And here they give the girl, and just like nobody had any value. Human trafficking was just flooding the streets in that day. We've met with you, young ladies been human trafficked, coming into the border. I'm telling you, there is a culture that is in this day that was faced trauma. People are facing trauma and abuse by people who should be protecting them, and it wasn't. And it's a difficult, different type of trauma when you've been abused by someone that should be protecting you, because now your trust factor has now been crushed. And it's hard to ever trust again. I'm telling you, what we've seen here is alive and well in our day. But what I'm telling you is your trauma may not be your fault, but your recovery is your responsibility. Yeah. I'm going to say that again a little bit slower. Your trauma may not be your fault, but your recovery is your responsibility. Naomi heard this lady had been affected by trauma. She lost her husband. She lost her 2 sons. You tell me she wasn't feeling trauma? But she had heard that God had visited her homeland. And she got back on that 75-mile journey that the Bedouins will not even take to this day by themselves to get back to where there was help. And there is a road to recovery, ladies and gentlemen, for your trauma. And it was all due to a boy being born in the fields of Bethlehem. And that Jesus come, and he can come and heal. And I know there's a lot of layers that can be worked through that, but she was able to get those layers, not to re-talk about some of that from last week, but there is a road to recovery. This morning's study, we're going to back up. We're going to look at the first 4 verses of this book and see what got them all in the situation. What got Naomi down to Moab. I'm going to read. I'm going to give you, obviously, I love doing some of the background, so we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the background of Moab and who they were. But I want to read this text and talk to you on this subject. The road to ruin. We got a father, a man here, that led his family to ruin. And I want to challenge a question to you, sir. And I am targeting. I'm not the word is. It's targeting me. I've been weeping throughout this week on multiplied reasons. Did you know that when a father comes to wherever a father goes in church, 80% of the time, and it's really up higher than that, their kids will follow. If it's just a mother, it's down at the 40%. This is a Christmas message that gets us to contemplate and think about where we are as it relates to a boy being born in the fields of Bethlehem, which is where Jesus was born as it relates to our Christmas story. Verse 1, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. I didn't get the history on that, when this book was written and why. And there was a famine, underline that, in the land. When the Old Testament mentions the land, it's always referring to the nation of Israel unless it has its tail in it some other place. Land is referring to the promise of God. It's referring to this is the land that God promised our fathers. So this is promised land. This is Canaan land, and there's a famine there. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judea, went to sojourn in the country of Moab. The word sojourn, note that word and underline it. It's very important to our text. He and his wife and 2 sons. Sir, you never go by yourself to Moab. You never go by yourself to Moab. Never will you do that. We are not an island. And it came, the name of the man was Elimelech. Verse 2. The name of his wife, Naomi. The name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. Underline the verb. It's very important to the text. We go from sojourn to continue. Note that, the progression of the text. They continued there, away from the promised land, in the land of Moab. Verse 3, and Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. Well, he didn't get what he was thinking. And she was left and her 2 sons. They took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled, underline the text. It is the third progression. They dwelled. Literally, the Septuagint is the same as it mentioned with the prodigal son who became a citizen of that country. The word literally means to be an inhabitant or a citizen. So their citizenship has been switched to Moab. They dwelled there. Now, as it goes on in this text, Mahlon and Chilion died, as both of them and the women was left of her two sons and her husband. With the help of the Lord, I want to talk to you on this subject, the road to ruin. We gather in this text to look, and it's a character study. We looked at Naomi. We're looking at this man Elimelech and his decision to leave. And in this process, I want you to know, once you leave, there is some things you need to know. You need to know that there's a sojourning involved. That means we get the mindset, that we got a mindset of Elimelech. We always rationale with our flesh, we rationale with the world, and we try to reason with the devil. We try to reason. I'm just going to go down there. We're just having a little hard time here. It's not going to be much. I'm just going to swing down to Moab. I'm going to swing down. And who was Moab? Moab was a son, that you go back, of Lot and his oldest daughter. It was incestuous. They were incestuous people, incest. If you recall, it was Lot, really, the father of Moab. His people started having a problem with Abraham's people. And they went, and Lot went down. He was led by his eyes, and he went to Sodom, the well-watered plain of Sodom. Sodom was just south of the Dead Sea. If you'll look at a map, which I didn't have up for you, but we are dealing with the Judean hills of Bethlehem. If you was to go just straight east and down 4,000 feet, you would run into the Dead Sea. If you would back off of that Dead Sea, was ancient Sodom to the south. This is where Lot lived. And there he made his way in that city and became a leader in that town. He sat at the gate of that city. He'd done well for himself, but he had to sacrifice a lot. He couldn't get his family out there. See, there's two things to think about when you sojourn. You may get to the point where you're ready to leave, but Sodom done got a hold of your family. I personally believe, this is my personal take of this text, that when Elimelech died, Naomi wanted to come back then with her sons, but her son says, nope, we here. There's a tender age. Listen to me, I'm trying to get you to see the end from the beginning. Don't look at your children now, look at them 10 years from now. And what got in these boys' heart, and we don't know it, actually the time frame, the text is leaning that when they left, they were young. They may have been down there for multiplied years. Now they're getting in their early teen years. Elimelech dies. Naomi's, let's go back to the house where we're from. No, we are Moabites. They have changed and renounced their citizenship. We see that in the word dwelled. It's what the Hebrew word means. It starts with a sojourn, but it leads. When you go back to Genesis 19, you'll see that Moab was started with an incestual relationship. So was the Ammonites. That was the youngest daughter, the oldest daughter, the Moabites. The Moabites, and due to God, he said they cannot have full presence into the people of God for 10 generations. You can't have full presence. And this man is leading his family not just away from the promised land, but to the absolute worst place he could go. That they couldn't have full presence back to the 10th generation. according to Deuteronomy. Not only was it formed out of an incestuous relationship, but you see that they were idolatrous. Now, if you want a full characteristic study of Moab, jot this down. I'm not going to go through all of it. I'll share some of it with you. You find it in Jeremiah 48. The first 45 chapters of Jeremiah, you'll find that God had a word for the people of Judah. To Judah. He's speaking forth the truth of God to Judah. But when you get to chapter 46, 47, and 48, there is a turn, and God speaks to the nations. See, the mindset of these local communities like Moab and Egypt is that they're territorial gods, that their little gods was there. They're idolatrous. And God is letting the people know, first of all, He's letting His people know, I'm not just a communal God. I'm not just God to those who believe. Just because you believe in God, don't make Him God. I quit begging people, please make Him Lord of your life. He's Lord. He is God. He's the God of the universe. He is Creator God. And He has chosen to reveal Himself to you. Whether you believe that or not does not determine the facts. See, the book of Judges, everyone doing that was right now. Well, I believe that and I don't believe that. And we think our unbelief stops the progression of God. And I'm telling you, the book of Ruth is letting us know, despite though the whole culture seems to be going away, God was still working His sovereign plan right through the midst of madness. What an awesome truth that is. They were very idolatrous. You'll find that Jeremiah had this message to Moab in chapter 48. Their local deity was Shamash. He's mentioned. He's a made up. And by the way, all of the idolatrous, all that is the enemy, the devil, with different facades. Puts different faces on to get people deceived. Oh, y'all like that type stuff? Okay, well, I'm Shamash. Oh, y'all like that stuff? Well, I'm Baal. Oh, you like that stuff? Well, I'm Ashtar. Oh, you like that? Oh, you into that? I'm Baal Poor. See, he's got a facade, but it's still the enemy. It's still the devil with different faces. That's idolatry. When a nation is given over and God is not in their life, that is called idolatry. Moab was an idolatrous nation. Jeremiah mentions that. It's one of the reasons for their judgment in Jeremiah 48. But several distinctives underneath that. Not only were they incestuous, they're idolatrous, but they're inglorious. They were very wealthy. And the reason they had their wealth, it was difficult to get to the plains of Moab. However, there was distinguished trade routes from Egypt on up into the north, to Syria, to Babylon, to get into Israel, come right through Moab. And they paid toll roads. The historians found on the Moab stela where they was paying tolls. I mean, they were very wealthy. That local city was wealthy. And Elimelech says, I'm going to go get in on that. There's not a famine there. The first thing I want you to know, and as far as the inglorious, it said that another thing that Jeremiah said, they were very prideful. They allowed and put all their confidence, it says, in their wealth and in their, they put their security in where their location, that no one could come and defeat them. But the prophetic word of Jeremiah 48 is that the Babylonians not only are coming to take Judah, but they're going to come on down and take Moab. And boy, they did. Nebuchadnezzar didn't stop at Jerusalem. He went on down that 45-mile tough hike, and he leveled Moab. And that was a prophetic word in Jeremiah. I go there to get you to look at it, to get the characteristics of Moab. This man is moving his family into the incestuous, into the idolatrous, into the inglorious culture of Moab. It says he sojourned. If you underline that word, it means to go pay rent. It literally means to just stay temporarily. I'm not going long. I'm just going to go get enough money to come back, and maybe it'll take me a year, and I'm going to go save up that money, and when I come back here, if there's ever another famine, I can get through that famine. There's several things I want you to consider as we think about this text. Remember, the Bible wants you to think. Number one, I feel like Elimelech was gone way before he was physically removed. When a person physically removes themselves from the presence of God, they've been gone for a year or more in their spirit and in their mind and in their heart. They're just looking for the right. Elimelech said, I'm going to go sojourn. Now, you say, where are you getting all that, all right? It says there was a famine in the land, verse number 1. Famine is first mentioned in Genesis chapter 12 in the Scriptures. In Genesis chapter 12, there was a famine. Guess where it was at? It was in the Promised Land. God told Abraham, leave Ur of the Chaldees and go to a promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Abraham said, that sounds good. He left his pagan, idolatrous nation where he was doing well, according to his accountant, and he goes to the promised land that's flowing with milk and honey, and he's thinking, boy, I'm going to get something better than this. And he gets over there, and he finds in Genesis chapter 12, there is a famine, and not only there's a famine, there's foes. There's 7 nations wanting to kill him. And Abraham said, I didn't sign up for this. What is this? And he takes off to Egypt. And God gets to him down in Egypt. He comes back. Why? Because a promised land is not that you're going to go to a place, and the land flowing with milk and honey was not geographical. It was getting Abraham in a place that he's getting all the crutches out from under him where he just completely trusts God. He became a man living in a tent the rest of his days, but turned the world upside down with the commission and purpose of God in his life. It's all perspective. It's all, are you living for the present temporal Moab or for the purpose, promised land of God and what God is doing in human history, which is bringing a baby to be born in the fields of Bethlehem, which took him to Golgotha's cross, which is bringing him back to this earth. So what are we in on? The enemy wants to get us in our mental game and our state gone. And then what he does, once he gets our heart, and he starts stealing our heart from the inside, we show up, we're just a shell here. Our mind is everywhere, our heart is not in it. Then all of a sudden the famine looks worse than it is. Now all of a sudden it's like, at least look, and you're out and you feel justified and you're leaving because it was famine. Now let me just make my point. Notice my point. Look in verse, and where I'm saying the famine wasn't as bad as you think. Look in verse number 21. Naomi comes back. She comes back to Bethlehem, Judea. She gives her condition when she left. Now, if you'd have asked Elimelech, why are you out? It's this famine, we're starving, I don't have nothing, I ain't getting nourished, I ain't getting fed, and I ain't getting this, and I am out, and every little thing. And my neighbors, they're looking at me sideways, and everything's just crazy. Ain't nobody love God anyway, everybody's fake. I mean, everybody's just a joke. They come here, they really don't believe what they're saying. If you knew what I knew and what you wouldn't even go there. So that's why I'm leaving. At least if I go, I'm going to make some dollars. That was his condition. What about Naomi's? It said that she left. This is not my words, this is hers. Verse number 21, it says, I went out full. She was full during the time of famine. She was full. The question is what are you feeding on? What are we feeding on? She goes out full, comes back empty. Elimelech leaves empty and never comes back. What a powerful thought. See, dads, it's very important where we take our families. It's very important. Because we don't know. We think we can make calls and we're in a place, but when we do some things and Elimelech gets out of pocket and he starts focusing on Moab and he says, I'm out of there, man. It's famine. Now the question is what's the promise of God say? What does the Word of God say? Go to the Word. The Word says that you're of the tribe of Ephraim. Your promised land is Bethlehem, Judah, of that tribe right there, and you're to stay right there in pocket of the promise of God. But when we're not listening to the Word of God, our faith cannot grow. Faith cometh through hearing His Word. And when your faith is growing, it'll give you the strength you need during times of famine. So he goes down to sojourn in the land. He's going just temporary. As he gets down there, notice, it goes to, in verse number 2 at the conclusion, that he continued there. He got down there and he was just going to go for a while to sojourn. But then the thing I want you to know is that it's never what you think. The other side is never greener. Sir, you thinking about that other illicit relationship? It's never what you think. It's never what you think. Or you think, you say, surely people in church don't think like that. Surely there can't be nobody here that's, boy, they're weighing that thing out and you're gone in your marriage and you've been gone in your heart for a while. And now all of a sudden nobody can do anything right. It's famine in our house. No one can do something right. None of them are clean. They can't do this. Can't do this right. Can't do that right. And there's just famine. If you didn't know what I go through every day, there's no ground, sir. You better think of your family. Well, I'm not going to stay married just because my kids and all that type of stuff. We got all of those things because you're listening to other things outside of biblical truth. And I'm telling you, you better get your heart back into the Word and let God's Word renovate your mind and revive your soul before you take a move and get out of pocket. And a lot of people suffer. Sojourned. It's never what you think. It's never what you think. I'm going to go on to the second point because then they go and they continue there. The word means to stay longer than you think. Sin always keeps you longer than you want to stay. It's always going to cost you a lot more than you want to pay. Always remember those truths. He gets down there and now he continues. I don't know what all started going on in his thinking. But I know how people are, in my years of personally dealing and then looking at biblical truth, you start thinking, boy, I've gone too far. Boy, I can't get back now. I don't know if I can make that journey back or not. I'm not so sure I can get my family and get them back over there because what will people think? I've been gone. And all the things that go in, he says, it's just better for me to just continue here. It's just better for me to get out of rent and let me start finding a place, a home to live. I need to find a school for my kids. I need to find some things because we're going to continue here. And the continuing started. Now there was no desire at all for the promised land. Promised land always represents into Israel is what God's purpose is in human history. I'm interested, ladies and gentlemen, what God is doing in history in the present. God enacts himself. It says in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son to be born of a woman. God invades history in the present with the purposes of his people living out what he's eternally doing. And I want to get in on that. That's purpose. That's a purpose-driven life. Each one of you have a purpose in carrying this out. Your first purpose is being a father. If that's where your first purpose. I'm going to do that because that's who we're talking to here. That's your first purpose. You find yourself there. Your purpose is to be that. Did you know that when kids in college, Barna asked him some questions and was like, okay, who has influenced you in your life? These are college-age kids, 3,000. Random college-age kids from different universities across the country. Who's had the greatest impact on your life? You know what the number one answer was? My father. That can be positive or good. Has that. It superseded the professor. It superseded the media. It superseded social media. It superseded all of that. Do you understand the power of that? You say, well, I'm nervous about raising my kids in these days. Listen, you done got 100 head start just of a God-given thing as you as a father. And by the way, your parents ain't looking for perfection. Not looking for that. Oh, I can't do that. None of us can do that. No, it's just every day we come in and say, God, I'm going to need some help today. I can't, and I'm going to need you to strengthen me in some areas, make the right calls. And boy, I want to keep the purpose before me every day. Don't try to live into tomorrow and 5 years from now. No one can do that. I've told you before, when I think about getting sermons ready for the next 20 years, oh my word, I got to run another mile. So we don't take those things. We don't have grace for that. We stay right here in pocket in the present. And what God wants us to do in this immediate second at this point. And we balance that out. And so now we've got him living, and now he's continuing there, and he's staying longer. Notice you go on down, it says he dwelled there, so he made a conscious effort. These are all mental conscious effort that now I'm never going back. I'm making a citizen of this country. That's what dwelt means. It means to inhabit, to become a citizen. I mean, got them up, all right. So we're here in, I don't know which little town they were in Moab. Maybe it's Zoar. Zoar was one of their chief towns. That was where actually Moab was conceived. So maybe it was right there. Hand up, all right. Put your hand on not the Bible, but on the book of human wit of Moab. Put your hand on it. Raise your hand. I. Renounce. Jehovah God, and the promised land. See, they knew about that history, by the way. Lot and their history, they knew all about the Abrahamic covenant. Now, will spend all of my time to make Moab the most idolatrous, the most inglorious place to live. I will resolve to allow my kids to be whatever it is that they want to be and what they're feeling at that time. Do you understand what you're sacrificing? You say, you're being overboard. No, I'm not. I'm reading the text and just showing you what the text is saying, that Elimelech, I think if he would have looked in verse number 4 that took place over a 10-year period, if he could go back, maybe there was something on the inside that say, if I could just get back. But he lost that dream, he lost that hope of getting back, and he died there. I'm not sure he wanted to be buried. He's buried in Moab. He's not in the promised land. He's buried in Moab. It says his kids. I don't know the truth of this. Someone was asking where I got some of my information. I get a lot from my Jewish learning. You just got to get on there and read. And I read some of the rabbinical history of this. Their take is that Mahlon and Chilion joined the military. Now that they were citizens, they joined the military of Moab. Moab was in excursions with Egypt often. And that these two boys died in battle fighting for Moab for rights with Egypt. Imagine that, dying for no cause. Dying for the enemy. The text does seem to say that both of them died at the same time. Was it an accident? Was that the case? They died in the military? I don't know, but look at the end. What he thought he was making a better life for his children. I'm going to take them down there where there's never a famine, where they can grow, where they can learn. They can get outside of all this stuff, and it's not going to drive them down. They can just be who they are, and they can and they died. It wasn't what he thought. The citizenship of that country did not pan out. The devil is a liar. He always deceives. He gets you to think that it's greener, that the box is there, and to get you out of pocket, and to get you there. And it may not be that he's after you, but he's after that next generation. Because the number of kids he can get out of Israel, he knows that's one less person living in the promised land of God. And by the way, it took 10 years, but he got to them. God does always flip a script, and I'm so glad that he does. And we understand that one of these daughter-in-laws made it back. And I'm going to follow that story, Lord willing, next week. But I want us to be very clear in our text that Elimelech made some moves on this road to ruin. And I believe if he could see the end from the beginning, maybe he'd have got 5 miles outside of Bethlehem. And yet he got a distance. And he started feeling. You can't tell me that he wasn't feeling. He was brought up in that land. He heard that God's going to move among his people. He had heard that a promise is coming through Abraham, that a Yeshua is going to be born. He heard all of that. Matter of fact, he left the very fields. Maybe his house was in the very fields where Jesus would be born, where King David was going to be born, in those very fields. And he left all of that. And I'm telling you, that was a hard first 5 miles. As he's wrestling, he knows, well, I tell you, there's always the odds. And we'll do Bible study every night. And I'm going to get them. And there's no way I'll put them out there. And I'll be able to insulate them and isolate them enough there. And there's not enough home schools. There wasn't enough covering your eyes. I'm just scratching the surface of the culture of Moab. Because there's mixed company. But I'm telling you, he led them into a pool of inglorious and idolatrous and paganism. And he led them there. And maybe his mindset was he was justified because he was offended. Or maybe he was justified because of this. And he thinks it's there. But listen, our ultimate decisions and the reason we do things is not for each other. And if I can be real open and honest, my first responsibility is to my family. It supersedes this church. I had one of mine say, listen, Dad, your problem is, you know what she told me? You trust people too much. You bring people you don't even know in your family, and you do that, and we've been in this game long enough, and you know that sooner or later you just wait, and we'll get upset because someone called their child this or this, and they're going to be out, and here you give yourself, and your problem is you trust two people too much. See, I'm called for this. I can handle it. And I'm pulling my children in this. And say, you're right. You're right. My kids have seen people shake their hand. I tell you. Have hamburger helper on a Friday, play game, love on each other. Gone. What? So what are you doing putting your faith in people? I say, man, that's a good point. That's a great point. But if I was doing it just for people, I would close up shop. But my main point, number one, I know there may be times of famine. I'm going to tread in this promised land. And I'm going to make it the desire of my heart. Yeah. We're going to march right here. And I'm not just doing it for them. I'm doing it for the purpose of God. It's the plan of God. And I'm doing it to satisfy Him. And the reason we live, and the reason we breathe, and the reason we move, and the reason we have our living, and the reason that I can even take breath in freedom, and the reason that I'm not hooked on drugs, and the reason that God has preserved me, it's all the good grace of God. And so I'm giving back to Him, number one, regardless of what the next person does. We're going to keep our focus. We're going to stay. If you don't have those mindsets, you're going to get your family, and you're going to be leading them. So what we doing again? Why are we going to? It's amazing the kids even lived in this 75-mile track to get there. This man, Elimelech, put his family in such danger. If you even study how they had to go down the 4,000 hill descent, over to Jericho, cross the Jordan River, go back up Mount Pisgah, 4,000, and then go through 50 miles of the Judean wilderness that grown Bedouin men struggle to go through there. What are ways we'll try to get away from God? My heart of giving to you is this. The reason we stay in Bethlehem is that there was a baby born in Bethlehem. In this text, it was Obed. Obed had Jesse. Jesse had David the king. You passed down 14 generations, and then the same fields was born from the descendants of David, from the descendants of Elimelech, from the descendants of Naomi, the Yeshua, the Messiah. I'm telling you, put your foot down, men. Consciously figure out what you're living for. All the noise that's going on that you wouldn't reveal to your own spouse, and all the things you're wrestling with. Oh, I pray you would puke it out to the Holy Ghost and say, God, I'm going to live in purpose and I'm going to live with desire. And yet, even when I face famines and things and contradictions, I'm going to put my faith in not man, not the preacher, not the singers, but I'm going to put it in the promises of God and the purposes of God. And I'm going to lock in knowing that He will never fail me. See, he left because he didn't think the promises of God were sure. Anytime you put your faith in man, whether it be me or anybody else in here, you start to get, what? Your future and the promises of God is not based on me or anybody else here. It's based on a faithful God who has never failed, and He is a sovereign God. He's spoke the end from the beginning, and we can trust His plan. And He let us in on it. What a Christmas gift of that. I'm going to start from the very beginning. If you've never received this Christmas gift, you can do that this morning. You can do that this morning. If you are contemplating leaving Bethlehem, I'm not as much talking about a geographical place. I'm talking about in your heart, getting away from the purpose and your calling of God in your life. Each one of you has one. And God will strengthen you to do exactly that. You've got great purpose in your life. That's the reason we first started and that was working right. I was thinking, thank you, Lord. You're about to change someone's direction and course. And you're going to salvage your family, you're going to salvage your home, you're going to salvage your life. And one of your kids is going to be, you think Billy Graham had it, wait till you see this one. And God's going to use them for His glory. Stay in pocket, stay true.